Thank you, Matt, and cheers. Nice to be here. Well, I think Matt described quite adequately what the talk is about tonight, Granville and the tradition that it comes from, the tradition of anthropomorphic characters. This picture, this is my protagonist, Detective Inspector LeBrock of Scotland Yard, badger, as you can see. You can't go wrong with a badger with guns, can you? I mean, basically. This picture isn't actually in the book. This was done as the sample piece of artwork that went along with the proposal that I sent out to publishers, you know, when I'm looking for a publisher at the beginning, like the pitch. So this was a pitch to show what the style would be like. But the book itself is actually inspired by the work of this man, early 19th century French illustrator called Jean-Ignace Isidore Girard, who worked under the pseudonym of J.J. Granville. And I've had this book for a while, and it was just one day I was looking at it, and I suddenly thought, Granville, that could be the name of Paris in an alternative reality where it's the biggest city in the world and it's populated by animals. And I wanted to do a detective story for a while, and I thought, yeah, detective, an English detective, ghost has to go to Paris. And that was just like that. That was where the idea came from. I wish it was so easy with my other books. But as you can see, he did these wonderful illustrations of anthropomorphic characters in contemporary dress. And I sort of moved it forward to the Belle Epoque, to sort of turn of the century Paris, because I thought it was a more interesting sort of time, almost a steampunk time. And Granville, he was a big influence on John Tenniel, who of course did the first Alice and Alice Through the Looking Glass illustrations. I think you'll be able to see how big an influence he was. If you look at this picture, this veal, the face here, then compare it to the face of the mock turtle in the famous picture from Alice. Of course, Alice is full of anthropomorphic characters. You'll see the influence there. The thing is, these are not new. These anthropomorphic stories aren't new. There's been anthropomorphic stories around as long as people have told stories. I mean, this cave painting from the Toifreux cave in southern France, they don't know how old it is. It could be up to 750,000 years old. And you can see it has an anthropomorphic character, you know, said to be a shaman, but it's an anthropomorphic character. And there's anthropomorphic characters in all the world's mythologies and religions. Here's Ganesh from the Hindu mythology. Of course, the Roman and Greek myths have anthropomorphic stories in them, such as Leader and the Swan. Here was Zeus. I mean, I don't know what it is with Zeus. I mean, he can't be very attractive. He keeps having to turn into animals and things to get laid. There's another story where he turns into a bull, and even another one where he turns into a shower of gold. Well, I'm not going to go into that. But in all the mythologies, it's another Hindu deity, Hanuman, the monkey god. He's one of the central characters of the Ramayana, and he's very closely related to the Chinese Sun Wu King, who's the monkey king of the legends. Of course, remade into a Japanese TV show, you may remember Monkey. And there were other anthropomorphic characters in these stories. So you can see they've always been around. The Egyptian gods, you've got Anubis and Horus and Sekhmet and Thoth over there. So you have lots of past. There's other ones. Even in the Bible, you know, the first chapter starts out with an anthropomorphic snake in the Garden of Eden. So they've been there since the year dot. But the real father, I think, of the modern anthropomorphic story is Noah Aesop, who told these fables about animals in the 6th century BC. He was a freed slave, and he told stories of, you know, the fox and the crow and the tortoise and the hare, the ant and the grasshopper. This is from a series of Victorian cards, collectible cards illustrating Aesop's fables, drawn by Charles H. Bennett, who did a lot of work for Punch, including sequential stuff. He did sort of a lot of comic illustrations. These sort of collectible cards. And he was sort of mid-19th century, so sort of overlaps with Granville. But these stories, after Aesop, continued in folklore and fairy tales throughout the years. There's Gustav Doré illustration of Red Riding Hood. But not just in Europe. I mean, all over the world I'm talking about. There's a whole raft of stories of African-American legends and folklore and tales, a lot of them concerning the Brer Rabbit, this Brer Rabbit character. And a lot of these stories, they came over with the slaves from Africa, from Central Africa, where they had lots of legends of anthropomorphic characters such as Anansi, the spider god, who's a trickster character, just like Brer Rabbit. And when they reached America, these stories sort of blended with the Cherokee Indian stories of the trickster rabbit, and you have Brer Rabbit. In 1881, this Joel Chandler Harris, he collected together these stories. Now, he didn't write them, he didn't make them up, he just documented them. These are stories that were being told. Many other people documented them as well, including Theodore Roosevelt's uncle. But Harris's ones are remembered now, today, because he invented a character as a framework of telling these stories called Uncle Remus, who's the person who sort of tells these stories. And he did 7 books altogether, collections of these anthropomorphic stories. And he actually even did a comic strip, which I've got here. I think there's about 14 or 15 episodes of it. And it was actually drawn by J.M. Cond, who was the illustrator of the Uncle Remus stories. This is one of the first printed comic strips, and in English, in England. And as you can see, it's anthropomorphic strip. This is actually a piece of political propaganda. It's what's called a broadsheet, political broadsheet. These will be printed and handed out, and they act in exactly the same way that, say, satirical strips act today. And stop me if you've heard this before, but this is actually criticising the alliance between the Tories and the Liberals, then called the Whigs, in this unholy coalition, because neither of them had enough sport on their own, And it's 1782. Plus la change, plus c'est la même chose, But it was criticising James Fox, the Liberal, the Whig, and Lord North, the Tory, leader of the Tories, in this alliance. And here you can see, Satan uniting them in this unholy marriage. Loves and the Fox and the Badger, 1782, by Thomas Rowlinson, the famous English watercolourist and illustrator. And you can see it has all the ingredients of a modern comic strip. It has sequential panels, it has speech balloons, it has thoughts bubbles. You can see these little images of what the animals are thinking in here. This book was published in 1851, Comical Creatures from Württemberg, and it's based on a series, it's 20 stories and 20 illustrations, based on a series of 20 tableaux that appeared at the Great Exhibition in 1851. And we know what the population of Britain was in about that time. Wasn't all that many, but millions of people saw this exhibition. This must have been quite influential. Millions of people saw this. And the tableaux were of stuffed animals in anthropomorphic poses. And here's another fox and a badger. I've chosen this one. It's another fox and a badger, because it seems to be this theme of a fox, the antagonism between foxes and badgers. This is supposed to be a badger here, I think. And they were from Württemberg in Germany. They're on loan from Germany. But lots of people, millions of people must have seen these pictures. Another fox and a badger. It's time from Beatrix Potter, Tale of Mr. Todd. And here they are having a fight in the badger's house. And there must have been something in the air, I think, when Beatrix Potter was around, because a lot of the people I'm going to be showing you next are almost exact contemporaries of Potter. Perhaps this influenced by the Great Exhibition thing, I don't know. But people tend to think of Potter as being quite twee and cute, but a lot of her stories are very dark. I mean, the first one, Peter Rabbit, 1905, the first book, it's all about the gardener chasing this rabbit to try and put it in a pie. Now, it's already eaten its father, In this book, Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny arrive here to try and rescue Benjamin Bunny's babies that have been kidnapped by the badger because he wants to eat them. And when they get to the outside of the lair here, the ground, this dusty ground, it's all littered with rabbit bones and rabbit skulls and things. I mean, I don't think they'd allow these sort of things in children's books today. They wouldn't get published. In her longest book, The Fairy Caravan, there's this chapter in the middle where a character eats Amanita muscaria mushroom, fly agaric mushroom, and hallucinates for a chapter. I can't imagine this being in children's books today. But, anyway, I've got I continued this tradition, so I have a conflict with my badger policeman and a fox, this fox assassin in the story. That's why I chose a fox when I first was the leader of the assassins. Yeah, LeBrock, he has all the deductive abilities of Sherlock Holmes, but being a badger is a bit of a bruiser, so he's quite happy to beat the crap out of a suspect, to get information. That's one of the reasons I chose a badger as the main character, because they're quite ferocious and they're quite tenacious, and the two qualities that I wanted LeBrock to have. Is it another reference to Potter in the story? This is Tiggy Wintle in Granville, Monomer, at her husband's funeral. Oops. Randolph Caldecott, who was 20 years older than Potter, who, by the way, she was born in 1866 and died in 1943, and a lot of these people I'm talking about are really around that time. He was born about 20 years before, but he was a big influence on Potter. This is from, he did a lot of these children's books on animals, and this is from Froggy Would a Wooing Go. See the froggy doing his wooing here. But if anybody's seen Beatrix Potter's rat book, Taylor Samuel Whiskers, you'll see that the rat's almost identical to Caldecott's rat here. A character I'm going to have in a future Granville book, actually. Another Caldecott picture. Let's have a mad dog. And I must admit, this is a very extremely tenuous link, because in Granville Modern Moor, I have a mad dog as well. Literally a mad dog serial killer called Mastock. Anybody heard of Lewis Wayne? Nobody heard of Lewis Wayne? Crumbs. He used to be incredibly famous. He's sometimes known as the Cat Man. Exact contemporary of Potter, within a year or two either side. He was just famous for drawing cats. I mean, he was bonkers about cats. He was crazy about them. He started off, his early work was very naturalistic, very realistic drawings of cats, but very soon they became sort of cute and cartoony and weirder and weirder. And, I mean, basically he spent the last 10 or 20 years of his life in Bedlam, in St. Mary's of Hospital, St. Mary's of Bethlehem Hospital, where, he was schizophrenic. So he was potty about cats, literally. This is a comic strip he did. He lived in New York for 3 years, and he actually did a comic strip based on cats. Did any other animals, just cats. This is Tom Cat as a waiter. But these are two pictures he did when he was in Bedlam. Now look at these. These were done in the 1930s. They look like 60s psychedelia, don't they? They're amazing. These fractal cats you have here. Incredible pictures. But yeah, he was immensely famous. Another contemporary of Potter, this time Benjamin Rabier in France, who did lots of these books for children with anthropomorphic animals in. But he's probably best remembered now for La Vache qui rit, which is still used to advertise cheese to this day. France. You probably think you remember these, but I don't think you do. I think you're thinking of something else I'm going to show you next. These were 3 of a series of 16 illustrations, oil paintings that were commissioned at the turn of the century from T.M. Coolidge, another Potter contemporary, to advertise cigars. There were a series of cigar adverts. He was paid to produce them, and they had dogs smoking pipes, playing poker, I love the bulldog here passing the card. Have you seen it with a foot under the table? That's great. He did these portraits, but he was a big influence on Arthur Sarn, who produced a whole series of these prints in the 50s. And you're probably thinking about these. These were the biggest selling prints in Britain and America during the 50s. And you can actually still see these on pub walls these days. You've got faded prints in it. And if you look, they have the same cast of animals in each picture. The same animals sort of repeat. So I do have, in Granville, they do have a guest appearance in one panel. You can see the Sarn dogs here playing pool. Another contemporary of Potter, this time German, Heinrich Klee. He did a whole series of these lovely pen and ink drawings based on anthropomorphic creatures. You perhaps might recognise this illustration by E.H. Shepard from Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham, published in 1908. Made a lot more famous actually in 1928 when A.A. Milne, who also famous for the anthropomorphic book Pooh Corner, House on Pooh Corner, he reworked Wind in the Willows as a stage play called Toad of Toad Hall, and it became even more famous. But this is a Ratty and Mole in Mole's living room having a chat. And I think this was a big influence on Granville because in Wind in the Willows the most capable character is the badger. But yeah, there's the Ratty and Mole in the Mole's living room, and in Granville I have a little nod to this. I have a scene with the rat having a chat with the mole in his living room. The rat in this case, it's LeBroc's sidekick, his Watson if you like, to LeBroc's Holmes, his adjunct, and he's named Ratsey, Detective Roderick Ratsey, and he's named after this character. Yeah, have you recognised these? Yeah. Tales of the Riverbank is apparently the longest running TV series in the world. It going in 1958, 1957 I think actually, and it's still running in one form or other today. It disappears for a few years and then somebody makes it again. It keeps coming back and remade. It's obviously not the original animals they're using. But, this was actually the hero, Hammy the hamster. And there's a third character in it, the guinea pig, by the hilarious name of GP. But you see all these little props and things like these motorboats and typewriters and pianos and things. And the filmmakers used to smear the keys with cheese so it looked like they were typing or playing the piano. They're actually trying to get some cheese out. In one episode, I seem to remember these unfortunate animals ended up in a hot air balloon they just released and went up in the air, And it was actually, I've not seen it, but in 2007 there was a movie, a feature-length movie came out with Steve Coogan doing the voice of Roderick. I can't quite imagine it, but sorry, but yeah, Johnny Morris, of course, used to do the voice in the 60s version. These set of woodland snap cards from late 40s, early 50s by the strangely named Racy Helps, who was very well known at the time. He did lots and lots of these children's books with animals. And beautiful. I mean, they're very Potter influenced, but they're beautiful pictures. Look at this, Mr. Cunningly Sly, the fox here. That's lovely. It's one from an earlier set, Woodland Happy Families, in the 30s. Now, I don't know who did these. It's anonymous, and it's not signed at all. But yeah, you can see the Potter influence very definitely. And there's a badger, a working class badger, like mine. My badger's a working class one. But I've enlarged this one here, a Master Hedgehog, because he's reading a comic. He's reading Comic Cuts, which along with Chips, was the first British children's comic. Now, you may not know, but the first British comics, were actually for an adult readership. They were adult comics. They were satirical. They appeared in Punch. They appeared as supplements in newspapers now and again. Comic supplements, as they were called, which where the name to describe the medium comes from. Comic meaning humorous, of course. And this freelance journalist called Alfred Harmsworth, I mean, the most famous one was Alice Loper's Half Holiday, the most famous sort of, what's remembered now most. But Alfred Harmsworth saw that some children, he was at a friend's house, he saw some children looking at this and enjoying them. And he thought, well, can they enjoy those, the political commentary and whatever. And he got the idea, they like looking at the pictures, they like following the stories in the pictures. And he thought, I'll publish a comic for children. This is where the British children's comic tradition comes from, comics being something that children read. And one of them was comic cuts. He did two, one comic cuts and chips. Comic meaning funny, cuts meaning that the printing, like it comes from the word woodcut, you know, to meaning a printing technique. So basically comic print. And these were phenomenally successful. They sold millions. They just took off. Within a few years, he was producing dozens of comics, children's comics. And he had dozens of imitators, also producing children's comics. And they were bought up. They were very popular. He made so much money on these two comics. Within 2 years, he'd established two national newspapers, the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror. Within a couple of years, he'd acquired the Observer and the Times. And within a few more years, he had the biggest publishing empire in the world. And he was later made Lord Northcliffe. All from these comics, these children's comics. And they were absolutely massive. I think we've got, yeah. This is another one of his comics that he did. But this character here is Tiger Tim. Anybody heard of Tiger Tim? It's amazing, isn't it? This, because it's a hugely famous, Tiger Tim, massively famous. He wasn't just in the Rainbow. He had his own comic, Tiger Tim's Weekly. He was in Puck. He was in other comics. But in 1904, he made history basically by becoming the first British newspaper strip. It was Tiger Tim in the Daily Mirror. And lasted until the 60s. It was in the Daily Mirror for ages. And he was immediately immensely popular, even with adult readers. He was so popular, people were buying the Daily Mirror just to read Tiger Tim's stories. You know, and eventually, Harmsworth, he thought, hey, Daily Mail could do with a bit of this, you know. So in 1915, the Daily Mail started they hired, that was Julius Stafford Baker who did Tiger Tim. They paid this illustrator, Charles Folkard, to come up with a character from them, and he came up with Teddy Tail. Now, who's heard of Teddy Tail? Hands up if you've heard of Teddy Tail. See, it's incredible how fleeting his fame, eh? You know, I mean, he was huge. He was a household name, Teddy Tail. He was massive. The slogan was Teddy Tail in the Daily Mail. Everybody knew who Teddy Tail was. It's all ephemera, this stuff, but you can't find much of it around these days. It's designed not to last very long, but this is a few things I found. Some on the internet, some at the Bethnal Green Museum of Childhood and things. But the stuffed toys of Teddy Tail, jigsaws, you name it, the stamp sets, letter writing sets. There's a Teddy Tail Club, Teddy Tail League. There was even records. There were 78 records, you know, of songs about Teddy Tail that were played on BBC Radio. He was just nationally a famous figure. And people were buying the Daily Mail just to read the Teddy Tail stories. Incredible. So what happened next is 1920, the editor of the Express, which was owned by Harmsworth's big rival, Lord Beaverbrook, another big press baron, he thought, I want some of this action, some of this anthropomorphic comic action. So he paid an illustrator called Mary Caldwell to create a character for the Daily Express. The editor's name was Herbert Tortel, and Rita, she married him. She's better known now as Mary Tortel. Your signature there in the corner. And the Rupert strips are like 2 panels a day with a little bit of text underneath, meant to be read out to kids. Because basically it was a nursery comic that she did, created with Rupert. In the first instalments, they lasted for several weeks, these stories. In the first one, Rupert didn't even have a name. He was just this little Bear Lost, he was called. And Mary Tortel's Rupert stories, they were very, like I said, they were very lightweight. They were they're like furry stories, little light stories. And Rupert only really took off as a character when Alfred E. Bestall took over in 1935 and started, as well as doing the weekly comic strip, he also started producing these beautiful watercolour painted line and watercolour wash annuals, which are still produced to this day. He retired in the 70s, but they're still continued by other artists. And Bestall introduced a strong sort of heroic adventure element to Rupert, and upped the age level of it, science fiction and fantasy element. You know, Rupert would go off on these fantastic adventures, you know, he'd go up to see cities in the clouds or whatever, or to South Sea Islands or whatever. And he'd always return home at the end, you know, of the story. And he was based in the village called Nutwood, which you can see here, which was actually based on, Bestall had a cottage in Bethgelert in northern Wales, and it was based on that sort of village. I think his father still, you know, still wears +4 to this day, you know. Yeah, that was Nutwood, his village, which in Granville, I actually start off near the beginning of the story. It starts with a murder in Nutwood. This is basically Rupert Burr's village. And that's Rupert Burr's house there. And that's Rupert Burr's dad mowing the lawn. And when they're actually leaving, you can see at the side of the thing, you see Rupert Burr's dad trimming the hedge in the background. And even on the, oops. Right. And there's a badger in Rupert. But I think there's another reason that I used a badger as a protagonist. Because Rupert had lots of friends, but in my mind, his coolest friend was Bill the badger. And I think it's something to do with the black and white markings, I don't know. But, yeah. Bill was was the coolest one. And when they're leaving the village after the little investigation on the way back to London, you can see the railway sign as Nutwood in the background. Can't go much further mentioning Crazy Cat, which appeared from 1914, syndicated in quite a few American papers, about a cat, by George Harriman, a cat to mouse. It's like this strange romantic triangle. The cat, Crazy Cat, who's asexual in the story, you don't know what gender he is, he loves the mouse, Ignat's mouse. The dog loves the cat, and the mouse just exists to try and brain the cat with a brick. So that's the setup. And it was seen as very avant-garde at the time. It was taken seriously by a lot of the intellectuals. And there was a ballet based on it. There's an opera based on it. It was partly to do with the surrealist changing landscapes. And bear in mind, this predates the surrealist movement by 6 years. But partly the way he used language, he had a very playful way of using language. Big influence on Hunt Emerson, of course, contemporary illustrator, who Hunt used to go around at one point with a badge that said Harriman is God on it. But yeah, anthropomorphic characters. Meanwhile, they continued in British children's comics. This Roy Wilson, he was very well known for doing them. He did dozens of these over decades. This is from the 1944 Radio Fun annual. A very sort of distinctive style. Very big influence on a lot of people who followed him in British kids' comics. And this is contemporary with him, La Bête et Morte by Edmond Francois Calvo, which is basically, it's the story of the Second World War told in anthropomorphic terms, using animals. And this was done, it first came out in 2 volumes. You can now get them all in 1 volume. And it's certainly not a children's story. You know, it's very dark. There's scenes of piles of corpses and people hanging from lampposts and all sorts of things. And this began to be produced. Most of this, the first half of it, was produced almost literally under the noses of the German occupying forces in Paris. He was doing it then. It's certainly quite a dark book. I've included Toby Twirl Annual just to show you how popular these anthropomorphic annuals were, because Toby Twirl didn't appear in a newspaper magazine. He just existed as an annual character. They were all written by Sheila Hodgetts and drawn by E. Jeffries, and he just did 1 a year. I wasn't never quite sure why he was called Toby Twirl. Presumably it's because he's got a pig's tail, a curly tail, but you never see the tail. They're too modest. It never pokes out from the back of his. You think he'd have a little hole in the back of his overalls there, but no. It's very famous. Uncle Scrooge. Anybody know the names of his nephews? Yeah, very, very, very famous. There have been Disney comics in newspapers, Disney strips in newspapers since the 1930s. But in the 40s, I think it was Universal Publishing, they started to produce actual Disney comic books. But it really only in the 50s when Karl Barks came on board and started drawing Uncle Scrooge that they really, you know, became something really special. And Uncle Scrooge had these fantastic adventures where he'd go off and discover Atlantis or El Dorado or somewhere, and usually with his nephews in tow, and then come back at the end. But he's basically a miser, a millionaire miser. And in Granville, Montgomery, I do have a little cameo appearance of Uncle Scrooge in the corner there. And also his nephew Donald Duck, which I guess you can see here, who's known as Toilet Duck in this reality. Yeah, it's strange because although in recent years the Disney comics have actually, they're not as popular in America as they used to be. 50s, they were huge. They're still hugely popular in Europe and the rest of the world, especially in, well, I mean, in lots of countries in Europe. In Italy, Topolino, which is the Italian for Mickey Mouse, it's still one of the biggest selling publications in Italy. In Denmark, Anders Ang, who's Donald Duck's name in Danish, it means Anders Duck. That sells, the Donald Duck Weekly there, it sells 1 million copies a week. Now, in a country that has a population of just over 5 million, I mean, this is pretty good going, I think. I mean, obviously a bit of seepage over the borders, but that's a pretty impressive sales figure. Keep going back to the British tradition. The Beano and the Dandy appeared from 1938 onwards, so a 50s edition. Both of them, of course, had anthropomorphic characters on the cover. Biffo the bear here. Dandy had Corky the cat, and there were characters inside. This was drawn by D. Dudley Watkins, who did invented Desperate Dan, and did the Woolly strips and the Bruins in Scotland. But inside, people like Leo Baxendale, who in the early 50s, along with Ken Reid and David Law, they reinvented the children's comic with characters like the Bash Street Kids and Minnie the Minx and stuff like this. These anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment figures. And Leo Baxendale did several anthropomorphic strips, such as the Gobbles, a family of vultures, and the Three Bears, you know, from Goldilocks, things like that. Another thing from the 50s is from a comic called Jack and Jill. It was drawn by H.M. Talentire, who in the interwar years, the Daily Mail actually had a comic supplement for children called the Uncle Ujar's newspaper. And this is Uncle Ujar from it. He appeared in Jack and Jill in this colour strip. Although this strip was called Jerry, Don and Snooker, with these three characters. One of them's his nephew. But they're surreal, aren't they weird to look at? I mean, I read this nursery comic before I could read. My parents bought me this comic. So I'm so steeped in this sort of thing. I mean, my Christmas present every year was the Rupert the Bear annual from my dad. But yeah, this is actually from the book that I had when I was 5. I've still got it. And it used to give me the creeps then, looking at this. Somehow I found it fascinating, this weird sort of style. Bit of a jump, but after I jump into the mid-60s, where I mentioned that the original comics were for an adult readership. And they became a medium for children. They became taken over as a medium for children. And it was only in the 1950s when the comics of the counterculture, the hippie comics, the anti-establishment comics, reclaimed comics as a medium for adults. And, I mean, these underground comics led directly to the graphic novel boom of today. These fed into the sensibilities of people like Alan Moore, you know, people who invented the genre. Fritz the Cat by Robert Crumb, who's probably the most well-known American underground cartoonist. There's Coochie Cootie here by Robert Williams, very surreal sort of artist. And Wonder Warthog by Gilbert Shelton, who's probably better known for Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. But I'm sort of going to start jumping now through the years, just showing you what sort of how the anthropomorphic comics have continued. I mean, Commandy was actually a big influence on me on Granville, I'm sure. It was by Jack Kirby. After he left Marvel, Jack Kirby, of course, created all these fantastic characters for Marvel, like the Fantastic Four and the Hulk, and the Incredible Thor, X-Men, and he was very dissatisfied with Marvel. He left. He went to DC, and this is one of the comics that he did there, which is basically, it was conceived of as a cash-in on the Planet of the Apes movies. The editor, Carmen Infanto, asked Jack Kirby to create something like Planet of the Apes. It's big, massive, very popular. He actually tried to buy the rights to do Planet of the Apes, but he couldn't get them. So he asked Kirby to do a version. Well, Kirby didn't have to. He'd already done one. In 1957, he'd done this strip called The Last Enemy in Harvey Comics, Harvey Comics, Alarming Comics or Alarming Tales, something like that. And he'd done this strip with, anthropomorphic creatures, animals, a post-apocalyptic future. And this actually predates the Planet of the Apes novels. So Kirby had actually done it first. And basically, Commandy was a continuation of his ideas in this strip, The Last Enemy. It didn't just have leopards in it, it had all sorts of animals. But yeah, it was sort of a very science fiction adventure story. With the Duck by Steve Gerber and Gene Colan, which was in the early 70s. It was one of the first sort of humour comics from Marvel. It was a satire comic. And the year this came out, they actually ran Howard the Duck for president against Carter. Carter yells foul, it says here. Assassination attempt defended by a gunman. Thought he was in season, says assassin. No, it's a funny stories. I still have actually the Howard for President badge at home. 1977, Dave Sim started self-publishing Cerebus the Aardvark. And what started as quite a silly sort of spoof of the Roy Thomas, Barry Smith, Conan the Barbarian comics, pretty soon became the most comic that was pushing the barriers and doing all sorts of new things with comics. He was very experimental. And you can see here he's experimented with speech balloons, sound effects, and he did lots of silent sequences. He really sort of played around with what the media could do. And it carried on going. He did 300 issues, finished in 2004, a total of 6,000 pages. And it's available. It's all still available now in these what he calls phone book collections. 1986. It had been serialised before Mouse, but the first volume came out in '86. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Mouse by Art Spiegelman. The first comic to win the Pulitzer Prize, and it mainly concerned his father's experience in Auschwitz during the Second World War. And in the stories you can see the mice, the Jews are represented by mice, and the Nazis by cats. 1984 saw the first issue of Usagi Yojimbo by Stan Sakai, and it's amazing. It's still coming out now. And Stan's never missed a month. Bang, bang, one a month. This is quite a recent one. You see it's up to 117 now. I don't know what this is, not 2008. Usagi means rabbit in Japanese. Yojimbo means bodyguard. And he took the title from the Kurosawa film about the samurai who goes to the village, takes on two gangs at once. It's later remade, of course, as Fistful of Dollars. And then Last Man Standing a bit later on. Published the same year, Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was another self-published comic. Kevin Eastman and David Eastman, Kevin Ladd. Is that right? No, it's Kevin Eastman. Kevin Eastman. Yeah. It was done by one of them. I can't remember which one. Got some sort of tax rebate, and together with a loan from an uncle, they self-published this. Within a few short years, they were multimillionaires. I know about 4 years into it. Mainly because it got taken on by a cartoon network. They made to a movie. About 4 years later, they'd each made, I think, $80 million apiece then. So they continued making this money all the time. So a huge hit. I mean, there's one time you couldn't walk down the street without seeing Mutant Ninja Turtle balloons or cakes with Mutant Ninja Turtle faces on them. Omaha the Cat Dancer, which is, came out from when was this? This was 91 or so, I think it started being produced. Erotic comic, well actually pornographic comic, not mince words, with the cat, well, anthropomorphic characters. She's a cat. Kate sadly died a few years ago, but I hear that it's NBM are currently doing new Omaha stories written by somebody else but still drawn by Reed Waller. And in Granville, if you have a little tribute to Omaha, I have a Omaha poster in the background here. It's in the Folie Bergère. Another anthropomorphic character, this time a bone, anthropomorphic bone, basically, by Jeff Smith. This is a fantasy epic. It's well over 1,000 pages long. It's published in a series, self-published again, in a series of books. Been immensely popular, sold a lot of copies. And Jeff's very influenced by the Uncle Scrooge stories. You know, there's a quest, Uncle Scrooge quest stories. Also Lord of the Rings. And also an American newspaper strip called Pogo, which I really should include in this, but I've not got around to it yet. But yes, it's a fantastic fantasy story. You see, it involves dragons, and it's very Lord of the Rings-ish. A contemporary strip called Hip Flask. It's the main character, Hieronymus Flask, who's a private eye. It's like a science fiction private eye scenario. Written by Richard Starkins, and this one's drawn by Ladron, who does these beautiful, textured illustrations. And the pages can apparently take him up to a month long. I mean, mainly because he'll get them to a certain level and then carry on working over them. There's only him who can see the minute changes, but he'll slave over them. And apparently Richard Starkins, the writer, he tells me that very often he'll go around to his house and wait until he's out or he's making a coffee or something and go in and grab the pages he has on the desk and run out with them to get them to the publisher on time. He spends that much time over them. This is I can't recommend this enough. Black Sad by Canales and Guianido. Two Spanish creators. It was first published in France, where very quickly it sold 200,000 in the first few months. And then it was published in other countries. But I really recommend these. They're very film noir, Chandler-esque private eye stories set in 1950s Los Angeles. And the brilliant stories, wonderfully executed. And if you've not read these, you're very lucky, because Dark Horse has recently reprinted all three in one, the first three stories in one book in English. You can get them all in one book. Is it still in print, Matt?
Yeah, it just came back in.
Great. Mouse Guard, which is another fantasy story, only with animals, like Lord of the Rings with mice. So that's the anthropomorphic comics. I'm just going to show you now a couple of little things from Granville. As I said, it's set in La Belle Époque. It's the first page. Great thing about Eiffel Tower is you don't need a caption. Stick that there. Everybody knows it's in Paris. This is like a back of an industrial estate, whatever. It starts off with this chase down the over the cobbles, down the alleyways. And I was actually mortified when the Sherlock Holmes movie came out about 3 months later, because it starts off with this carriage rattling through these cobble streets. And this carriage being chased by assassins. And believe me, it's a lot easier typing in the assassins are wearing steam-powered, piston-driven wheelie boots. It's a lot easier writing that than actually designing the things, let me tell you. But they were actually inspired by this old French invention. What you mean? Nothing ever came of it. I don't know why. But, you can see I've added the little engine and the pistons and things. But yeah, that's where it comes from. This page in the story, Britain's connected back to France with the Channel Bridge. The idea is the train goes into this island in the middle of the channel, and you have to change over here. It's called the Free Trade Zone, and you go and get your train, which takes to Paris, and then this one comes back. But this was inspired by, in the 70s, there were actually plans to build a channel bridge including this an island, artificial island in the middle. And if anybody has any, I've done searches, internet searches, trying to find these conceptual drawings, which I saw in the 70s. They were in a colour supplement. But I've not been able to find any. So anybody does ever come across them, please email me and send me a copy. I'm going to zoom in on this little panel here because I want you to start spotting the references if you can. Can anybody spot the reference in here? Yeah? So inadvertently, no, it's a reference to this 1862 painting by Augustus Egg called Travelling Companions. Now, I'll go back to it. You can see I've just done them as ostriches, basically. But it's a reference to them. But look at the hats that they're wearing on here. This was also referenced by John Tenniel in Alice. See the hat she's wearing? This came out about 9 years after the exhibition with that in. And if you look at the windows, they're the same windows, these rounded windows and the same hat. Yeah, so you were right eventually. Yeah. In Granville, there isn't just anthropomorphic characters, there's also humans, as you can see with these characters up here. Well, there's a bellboy here, and this character. And in the story, they're sort of second-class citizens. They're like a human underclass who has no citizenship rights. They're menial labourers. And this one here is Beccassine, who was, 1905, she was the first ongoing French newspaper strip character. And arguably, she was actually the first female protagonist in comics. She's still around to this day, Beccassine, although there's no comics, the comics aren't being produced anymore, but they exist as children's stories. And they're a lot more politically correct these days. The original joke in the Beccassine strip was she was this dumb hick from the sticks who came from Normandy or somewhere, and she was working as a nurse for a posh family in Paris, and she made all these appalling social gaffes. You know, it's because she was stupid from the country. You know. Another character, and see the door faces are usually references to French comic characters. The bellboy is a reference to extremely famous French comic character called Spirou, who originally written and drawn by Robert Velmer from 1938 onwards. He's this bellboy, has a badge. This character's huge in France, massive, very popular, almost as popular as Tintin. You go to the Angoulême Comic Festival, and there's kids walking about in Spirou caps and things. You know, I mean, very popular character. After Velmar died, lots of other people drew it, including André Franquin. This is his version of Spirou. And this is from Granville Monomer. These two characters here are in for about 3 pages. They're a reference to these two French characters. This is Gaston Le Gaffe, another character created by Franquin, also from the pages of the Spirou magazine. And Lucien, who's created by Frank Margarin after he finished working for Metal Hurlon, which became Heavy Metal. But as you can see, there are different versions of them. So the Franquin character, who's also massive in France, Marsupilami, you can buy Marsupilami stuffed toys and figurines and puzzles and all sorts of things. And in Granville Monomer, I have, this is a scene in a brothel, and I actually have a prostitute with a Marsupilami costume in the background here. Of course, you probably get this reference here. In Granville Monomer, you find it the Prime Minister of Britain. So he's a bulldog, he'd have to be, wouldn't it? You know, have to be a bulldog called Harold Drummond. Obviously, reference to Bulldog Drummond. He usually ends most sentences with the "oh yes," but he's, of course, from this picture, Churchill. And you spot the reference here. It's probably a more famous one. No. I thought you'd have got this one. This is a reference to the absinthe drinker by Edward Degas, famous Impressionist painting. Another reference. Did we get this one? Should be self-evident, actually. It's from Granville Monomer. Rodin's The Kiss. Of course, actually, Rodin did actually want to use badgers, but it was considered a bit controversial at the time. I used badgers. Another reference here. Let me spot this one.
Yeah, that's... yeah, now. I can see the picture.
Yeah, Edward Manet, the Folie Bergère, which it is. Reference to that one. I do have Lebrock at the bar ordering a bottle of Bass in the Folie Bergère. And this is because they actually served Bass at the Folie Bergère. Look, here's 2 Bass bottles. This was at a time in prudish Victorian England when businessmen, they couldn't go anywhere racy like this in London. They had to go to Paris. So they used to import British beer to sell to them when they were there. And that's the panel I'm just showing you. And this is the 2 facing pages that where it appears. I just want to show you this to get across the importance of when I'm designing a graphic novel. It's important to know which pages are facing which. Partly because you can keep the surprise over the page. You have to turn the page to see what's coming next. So you don't put it down here. You don't put it on here. And a number of times I've read a superhero comic and there's somebody here saying, I wonder who Mr. X is, Professor X, whatever. And you can see him taking his mask off there. See it. Because when you read a comic, you don't read it. You read the text in a linear manner, but you can't help it. Your eyes flit about all over. They take everything in. And then you assimilate the pictures into a linear form. It's called panoptic reading. And that's how you take in a comic. But another thing about knowing which pages face which is that you can encapsulate an entire atmosphere within 2 pages. And it can have its own atmosphere. You can turn the page and a different atmosphere. So that's one of the reasons I always try and end a scene. Not always possible, but I always try and end a scene on a right-hand page. Another example of containing an atmosphere between its own 2 pages. Another thing about, I always draw the pages that face each other at the same time. I always design them at the same time. I design them in 2-page sections after I've written the script and everything. I decide what's going to be in each panel and how big the frames are going to be. And then I make sure that the proportions correspond so that they're harmonious. And what I've done here is next thing I do usually is draw the panel borders in ink so that when I draw a pencil, if I rub it out, they're still there. I can still see where they are. And then I pencil them in. So I've scanned in 2 of the pages and put them together on computer. And on Photoshop, I've just put these little lines in. And what they mean, all they mean is the arrows, the lines are the same colour. They're exactly the same length as each other. So this width, it's the same as that height, or this width. These are squares. Right? Everything that's the same colour corresponds. So they have a harmonious balance. And this is what this page looks like finished. You're able to see that. That's this page. These 2 pages. See here, I couldn't end this scene on the end of a page on that side. So it's actually got a different ultimate background. It's got a black background which really marks it off from this bit. I'm going to zoom in on this panel here, which I quite like. It's Sarah Blaireau's apartment in the story. Sarah Blaireau, loosely based on Sarah Bernhardt, the big French star. And that's actually based on Sarah Bernhardt's apartment. You see, it's quite sumptuous. Anybody spot the reference here? Perhaps not. So it's an opium den, which might give you a clue in the story. It's actually, if you look at the ladder and these things hanging up and everything, it's a reference to famous Gustave Doré illustration of an opium den in London, A Pilgrimage. There's the stairs. There's a cat sitting on the stairs. I don't you can see its eyes there. And in this opium den, he's gone there to question this character from Information, who's an opium addict. And anybody recognise him? Yep. His name is actually in the story Snowy Milou. Milou is the name in the French Tintin albums. Yeah, he's Snowy, of course. Here he is. And while LeBrock's sort of interrogating him, he keeps drifting off into his opium dreams, and he's saying, yeah, there was a crab with golden claws, and I think, he's dreaming the Tintin adventures. Actually, this struck a chord with a lot of people. It was only in for a page and a half, but especially the French edition, a number of people who've commented on this, who were moved by it, or poor Snowy, or, yeah. And I just want to say a little bit about, a tiny bit about visual storytelling, because when I design a page, I've shown you how I designed the 2 pages facing, I always try and have a compositional line, a compositional flow through the panels to lead the eye on. And you can see, I've put this here because it's very clear. You can see that very clearly. That's the compositional line going through these 4 panels. Here you can see it's a wavy line. If you look at the focal points of interest in each panel, they'll follow this line. Here it's a straightforward line going up. Here it's a different one. It's sort of like that, and then down and up and down. Here another straight line. Here too, but it's a horizontal line, and it almost helps to sort of push the character through the door. Very obvious one here, you can see the progression on these 3 panels. And here it's sort of wavy line. Here too. So very often I'll start, before penciling anything, I'll start with the line, just go, just like that, through the panels, or up, or across, or whatever. And lastly, I'm just going to show you the different stages a page goes through. When I'm doing it, because I still like drawing by hand, so it's all penciled on a drawing board, the pencil, and then I ink it with a mixture of pens and brushes. You can use pens for nicer straight lines and sharp lines, the brushes for more flowing lines like hair or texture or garments. And then that's just adding the thicker panel borders on Photoshop, and then the lettering, which I always keep on a separate layer. This is for foreign editions, because very often the words and the grammar means that they take up bigger space. So I always supply the files with a picture and the text on a different layer. Then the flat colours are done, and this is the only sequence. This is the only sequence I don't do in the entire book. I do everything else, from the pencils to the finished colouring and everything. But just to save me a little bit of time, I pay somebody to do the flat colours, which basically means that they'll pick out an area like the elephant's head, the blue coat, the white, the badger's head, and they'll colour it a flat colour, just flat colour, which makes it a bit easier for me. It saves me the time when I'm going through to do the final rendered colour, because it means I can just click on this and get the whole elephant there masked out, and I can just work on it. And it's very like working with brush. I use a Wacom tablet. It's very much like painting with a brush. This is a finished colours. You can see I've changed some of them a little bit, like her dress. And I've also dropped in the background on the panels. And then I added tint, I don't know if you saw that. I usually add a tint to each scene, its own slight tint, to give each scene its own, add to its sense of having its own atmosphere. One of the few things I do to do that. And it's finally, you can see the bleed around the edge, which doesn't get actually printed. It's finally cropped. This is on a separate layer, the sort of explosion, the gun flare. Yeah. And that's what it appears like in the eventual comic. So, yes, that's the end of it. There's the 2 books. I've got the next one scripted and the next 2 after that loosely plotted out. So I want to do a series of these books. So that's the Granville books. Thank you.